It's The World This Week, 7 days, 4 Paris-based correspondents, 1 hour. The World This Week in partnership with the Daily Beast. Foreign editor Christopher Dickey is with us. How are you, sir?
Happy to be here.
Happy to have you back. It's been
a couple of weeks, yeah.
You were here last week.
Well, a couple of weeks before that.
Okay,
Who can keep track?
With us as well, Rim Momtaz, France correspondent for Politico.eu. Or should I just say Politico? Politico. Yeah. Okay, there we go. Johanna Frenden is the correspondent for Swedish newspaper Aftonbladet. How are you?
I'm very well. How are you?
All right. And Antonio Rodriguez, who cracks the whip at the Spanish language desk of the French news agency AFP.
Yes, at the economics.
The business desk.
Yes, in the business desk.
All right, there we have it. The World This Week on Facebook and Twitter. Hashtag World This Week. And there we were, all ready to talk about Robert Mueller's resignation as special prosecutor in the U.S.-Russia meddling probe. The President of the United States changing the conversation with a tweet in which he said on June 10th, the United States will impose 5% tariffs on all goods coming into the country from Mexico until such time as illegal migrants coming through Mexico and into our country stop in capital letters, as you can see. There have been other tweets talking about stopping drug cartels running rampant. What's this all about?
Well, I think you got it right. Changing the subject was the first thing it was about. And the second thing is that he's not getting his wall built. Mexico's not paying for the wall, so he needs this symbol.
But he's just done this trade deal with Canada and Mexico.
And it's the greatest deal of all time because he made it, of course. But in fact, he never cared about that deal. He only cared about doing away with the old deal because Obama had done it. Anybody or had been involved with it. Any deal that was made before he came into office is a bad deal, according to him. But the sad thing about Trump is that he can't make a deal anymore that anybody has any faith in. Because if you keep tearing up every old accord, every old agreement, and saying you're going to get tough with whoever you negotiated it with by taking often radical measures, who's going to have any faith in you? And I don't think there is much faith in him as a negotiator anymore. All
right, we're seeing that there's a mixed reaction out of the U.S., the Chamber of Commerce, which is alarmed by this. Republicans in the U.S. House committee that oversees trade saying it was in the interests of both countries to reach an agreement on immigration.
Republicans. Well, that says it all, doesn't it? They are totally in lockstep with this man. They seem to think he can do no wrong. And no matter what he does, including, by the way, more important things than this, including a direct assault on the Constitution, the rights of Congress, the courts, everything else, the Republicans go along with it. Why they have turned into such unbelievable whores is hard to imagine, but they have. And so that they go along with 5% tariff on Mexico because we need to do something about immigration, of course they do. They could say he was going to nuke Mexico, and they'd say, that's nice.
Mexico's new left-wing president, billed as a firebrand, but on this one, Manuel López Obrador playing it cool.
Using coercive measures never leads to a good outcome. 24 million Mexicans live and work in the United States. So we have to act with the utmost caution.
Antonio Rodriguez, our Mexico City correspondent, earlier saying he was outside when it was a morning press conference, their time, saying some people wanted a bit more fire in the belly from AMLO on this one.
I understand that López Obrador is cautious right now. He's cautious because Donald Trump is shooting himself in the foot. Higher tariffs on American importation of Mexican products will increase the prices in the United States. The consumer will have troubles. There will be inflation. The car makers are importing parts from Mexico to produce cars in the United States. Those cars will be much more expensive. So that's bad in the long run for the United States economy. in the short term, it's bad for Mexico. That's true. But that's the way Donald Trump is always negotiating. He sends a tweet. He writes a tweet in the morning. Then you have the markets falling, and then he discusses. And by the way, about the new NAFTA agreement, he didn't get a lot from Canada and Mexico. It's not that the result of this strategy is not that easy to understand.
Montaz?
What's interesting is that Mexico had become, after Trump declared what amounts to a trade war with China, Mexico had become the biggest trading partner in goods of the U.S. There are very important interests from the American perspective. Since 1994, there's our chains of agricultural and commercial supply chains that have operated outside of tariffs since 1994. And we're talking about production for companies that are in the Fortune 500 companies in the US. This is going to have real repercussions for American interests, and by the way, in states that have supported Donald Trump. It's going to be interesting to see what happens long term if these tariffs go up to 25%.
All right, it's not just Mexico that's in the crosshairs of the U.S. president. His Secretary of State in Berlin this Friday, Mike Pompeo, making amends for a skipped visit earlier in the month, but there too throwing his weight around, issuing a thinly veiled threat, or actually you might even say an overt one, to his hosts that nations that build 5G phone networks with China's Huawei could find themselves cut off from access to U.S. information.
We can't permit private citizen data from the United States or national security data from the United States to go across networks that we don't have confidence, that we don't view as trusted networks. That's how we're thinking about that.
A footnote on this one, Angela Merkel on the same day also welcomed China's Vice President Wang Qishan for closed-door meetings. What do you make of that, Monta?
Europe is awakening. I think right now we are seeing in France, we are seeing in Germany, more and more of a desire to just stand their ground because they're realizing that at the end of the day, yes, they have a special relationship with the US in the sense, not the sense that we always hear about with the US and the UK, but there are long-term relationships and alliances with the US, but they're also seeing that the US is not does not hesitate to use language that it never had ever used with people like European countries. They've sent very menacing and threatening letters, not just, by the way, on the trade deals, but also, for example, on issues like Iran and Instex, where the Europeans are trying to preserve their own commercial interests, and America is just throwing its weight around trying to bully them into doing what they want.
It's not always about the economy, though, is it? As Christopher was saying at the outset, Antonio.
I don't know if it's about a lot of things. I just want to remind you that Angela Merkel was the NSA was listening to Angela Merkel a couple of years ago, and it's not just Huawei actually and China who is listening to what we are doing all over the world. About what you said, Europe awakening, I'm just surprised that in front of the threat of Donald Trump, the European Commission has decided to start trade negotiations with the United States. And that's in this case, that's a success for Donald Trump. If he gets a trade agreement with Europe, that would be huge for him.
Will they think twice, though, after the events of the past 24 hours?
Well, it's interesting because clearly France stood alone in opposing that trade deal, and we'll see if Macron's going to start getting more people on his side.
Joanna Friendland, before you had the Cold War, then it ended, and there was this superpower, the Pax Americana, and, if you will. Now, where are we going is the question.
That's the small question I get. Where are we going? Yeah, that's a very good question. I mean, I think it's we have to face the fact that we're in a completely new situation. I mean, we are still discovering Donald Trump, obviously, and with all the happenings around Russia, Europe right now, and the trade deals, trade wars that he's sort of pursuing every now and then. So I think that we're in some kind of new era. It's really hard to say where it's going though, because there are attacks on every part, every corner of the world Donald Trump. There is no real he's not very coherent or consequent in his doings. So that's why it's so hard to predict as well, I guess. But I mean, more than anything, this is the era of Donald Trump. That's what it's about. It's about himself.
Is
it's
it just
his
about
ego.
Donald Trump, though? Is it just about
For him? Yeah.
Because what you're describing is the era of disruption, and that's something that has been embraced by many of his opponents in the Silicon Valley. Change the form.
Well, look, there's the kind of disruption you have with creative minds developing new technologies like in Silicon Valley. And then there's the kind of disruption that you have with Donald Trump, who basically is coming out of a world of reality TV, fraudulent real estate deals, and world wrestling entertainment. That's the disruption he's bringing. And he brings an enormous amount of narcissism to his
But you're reducing
position.
it to one person here.
Well, I think we absolutely should reduce it to one person. He reduces it to one person all the time. After the kerfluffle a couple of days ago, where at first he tweeted that, yes, the Russians had elected him, then he said, no, they didn't elect him. When he responded to the questions, who really elected you, he said, I elected me. Come on. Come on.
Donald Trump's transactional diplomacy still on the rails when it comes to the Middle East. He still has his deal of the century. He thinks he can spring. He's got a conference at the end of next month in Bahrain to finance development in the Palestinian territories. Well, it's only partially on the rails, though. Trump's Middle East envoy and son-in-law, Jared Kushner, concluding a tour of the region with a visit to staunch ally Benjamin Netanyahu hours after the Israeli prime minister failed in his bid to form a government. And rather than let another party have a go, the Likud leader dissolving a parliament. Christopher Dickey, is that the end of the deal of the century?
Yep. It was never a deal worth talking about to begin with. That's why we haven't seen it. It was always crap. It was always going to be imposed on the Palestinians with the idea, you lost, get over it. We're going to try and make
But
your
this
life a little more
conference in
comfortable.
Bahrain is still on.
Oh, yes, because and who's sponsoring it? First of all, why is it in a Saudi satellite like Bahrain? Because this is a plan essentially put together by Bibi Netanyahu and Mohammed bin Salman. And it's always been on their terms, partly to have a united front against Iran, and partly because they don't give a damn about the Palestinian people. Unfortunately, for the plan, the Palestinians give a damn about the Palestinian people, and they're not going to go along with it. But this was really screwed up because Bibi Netanyahu is going to be indicted this summer, and the reason he couldn't form a government is because he was trying to get the new members of the cabinet to sign on to arrangements that would stop him from being indicted, and nobody is going to save his ass now. So as a result, he's in big trouble, and the peace process is dead.
We've written Benjamin Netanyahu's political obituary many a time, including in the build-up to last April's election, and been proven wrong. That snap election's on September 17th. A lot could happen between now and then.
Definitely. And you should never write out Benjamin Netanyahu. I think he goes into the snap election strong, even though he's dented. I don't see anyone being able to. He is going to be in the same position in September. It's definitely interesting the position he's in because it's unprecedented in Israel. But to go back to that deal of the century, I just find that to be very interesting that we are going into what is the economic side of the supposed deal at the end of the month in June with an Israel that doesn't have a government and the Palestinians who are not showing up. So how are we doing a deal of the century on one of the most intractable conflicts of our recent history without the two main stakeholders in a position to actually be part of this deal?
All right. Netanyahu's far-right former defense minister, Avigdor Lieberman, refused to blink when Bibi asked him to drop his insistence that more ultra-Orthodox Jews do their military service.
It's just unbelievable, Avigdor Lieberman is now part of the left. You give him votes for the right, and he doesn't give his vote to the right-wing government. This is what we see.
Lieberman's now part of the left. How's that for an insult, Johanna Frenden?
I believe for him it's a huge insult. I doubt he takes it very seriously, though. I mean, it's obviously more than anything strategy or disappointment, I think, from Netanyahu's side. Although it's interesting to see how somehow the whole Israeli right has been built up around this one man for such a long time, and when he's being challenged, obviously this is somebody who will not accept that, and insulting political opponents is probably good at the moment. Is it going to work in the long run? Is it that a good plan for September snap elections? I think it's quite risky. I think he's risking a lot with this kind of speaking like this at the moment.
The rest of the world projects, and when we saw the original announcement that the bid to form a coalition had fallen through, Antonio Rodriguez, over this issue at face value of whether or not more of the ultra-Orthodox should serve in the military, it really resonated, it seemed, with people here in France who were watching this argument over, the religion, separation of religion and state divide.
Yes, of course, here in France, you have the state divide. It's something, actually, I'm not a specialist, and it is not something I can understand exactly what it means. But what I'm concerned is that you have this, in Israel and in several democracies in the Western Europe, you are not able to reach agreements to form a government right now. And we saw it in Spain. We didn't have a government for almost 1 year. We saw it in Belgium. Belgium is still looking for a new government. And maybe we are going to see it in Germany very soon after the bad results for the coalition in the European election last Sunday. So what we see is that the main parties, the traditional parties, are facing.
It's harder to compromise. Everyone in the age of
compromise
has to posture more than before.
And you have new political parties. You have new. You have to look for alliances like Theresa May, who went to Northern Ireland to find support for his government. We have here the ultra-Orthodox. It's a concern for democracy in the Western world.
All right, we're going to see how Europe does when it comes to compromise, certainly when it comes to filling its top jobs when we come back. Stay with us. You're watching The World This Week. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's The World This Week. The World This Week in partnership with The Daily Beast. Daily Beast foreign editor Christopher Dickey is with us. Welcome back as well to Rim Montaz, France correspondent for Politico. Johanna Frönden, correspondent for Swedish daily newspaper Aftonbladet. And from the French news agency AFP, Antonio Rodriguez, who just before the break was worrying about coalition building. Well, we have just the topic for you. It's not just with Washington that Germans have hard bargaining before them. A post-European elections summit took place Tuesday in Brussels. The chance to start, the usual horse trading to fill the top jobs at the EU. For once, the Germans thought it was their turn to get the Commission presidency, the one held by Jean-Claude Juncker. Well, with the leader of their bloc getting the most votes, the center-right bloc being a conservative Bavarian, Manfred Weber. Funny enough, though, Emmanuel Macron mentioned lots of names, but not Weber. His MEPs will sit with the Liberals, whose nominal leader is Denmark's Margrethe Vestager.
She, as well as Mr. Barnier, Mr. Timmermans and many others have these competencies. But I don't want to have a debate on names. I want to have a debate on projects, on priorities, and on criteria.
Of course, he does want to have a debate on names, doesn't he, Raymond?
And he's been having it for many months. The negotiations over all of these top jobs have been going on behind the scenes between, by the way, heads of states and their diplomatic advisors for many months, preparing. They've been telling us, of course, we don't want to get ahead of the electoral process because this is a democratic process, but they've been talking, and you could see it in the run-up to the European Parliament election. Macron met with Merkel, with Rutte, with Sanchez, with Carlos. He was building his coalition. So right now he is building a coalition with the Social Democrats, and obviously the Liberals in the middle, with whom he is forming a group in Parliament. And we got a little bit ahead of the news ourselves this past week when we finally found out that they were looking at what are they going to name this group.
Right.
And they're looking at maybe Renew Europe or maybe the Europeans, which made me think about The Americans, you know, that show about the Russians in America.
Russian spies. Yeah.
Russian spies in America. So clearly they are talking about names, and clearly Weber is a complete no-go for Macron.
He mentioned Michel Barnier, but Michel Barnier is with the EPP group. He's with the same group as Manfred Weber. Is that what Emmanuel Macron wants? Is that the man?
It's very hard to know what Emmanuel Macron wants right now. He's someone who plays his cards very close to his chest. Barnier could be a compromise. He just definitely does not want Weber. It's something to do with breaking that German sort of monopoly over decision-making in the European institutions. Barnier may be finally a compromise candidate, but he's not looking great right now.
Germany has not had the presidency of the Commission for decades, Johanna Frenden. Is it their turn?
Well, no, I don't think you can really see it that way. I mean, obviously, it's on some level this is diplomacy as well, but it's not. I mean, what they really have to go for is to find the good person, and why not go for a Danish woman that is not so involved in one of the two big forces or powerhouses of European politics at the moment.
But it's so splintered that you're going to need those votes from that big center-right bloc, from the EPP.
And I mean, everything is sort of new in the European Parliament as well. This is what we will have to face as well. We have new powerhouses, new blocs, the Greens coming in. Lots of things will have to sort of settle, I think, before we can really see where which way the power or the will go.
Right. Can you reassure Antonio Rodriguez here? He's worried about the splintering of the vote. Is that good or bad news?
I guess it depends. I mean, it's probably good if you are looking, for new policies and to avoid some old deadlocks. I think it's yet to be seen, really, because it's a situation that Europe hasn't been in a long time, and many will argue that it could have been a lot worse with undemocratic extremists in power. They are going to find a good sort of compromise, I think, in the end. But I cannot promise you anything more than that. I'm afraid.
One of those who is bolstered is Spain's Prime Minister, Pedro Sanchez. He came in actually talking up the chances of the leader of the Social Democrat bloc at that summit on Tuesday. What's his position now vis-a-vis the European Parliament? The good news is he's got a stronger mandate, but he's also going to have those two Catalan separatists, Carles Puigdemont and Oriol Junqueras, who've been elected. Junqueras, who's in jail.
Yes, they're in jail. And for Sanchez, he got a very good result in the European election and in the national election 1 month ago, but he has no majority in the Congress. He needs a coalition too.
Did the vote from last Sunday give him an extra boost as he tries to build that coalition?
It's an extra boost for him in Brussels, because in the last 10, maybe even 20 years, you didn't have the voice of Spain in Brussels was very weak. You didn't hear a lot Rajoy and even Zapatero earlier. And suddenly someone arrives, a socialist arrives with the support of the country. And that's very interesting for Spain to get some influence in Europe.
All right, so there's on the left side of the spectrum, Pedro Sanchez of Spain. Italy's results on Sunday forced a vote of confidence this week among 5 Star supporters for their movement's leader, Luigi Di Maio. He didn't have to sweat too much in that vote of confidence. It was an online vote. It wasn't much outside scrutiny, apparently. Nonetheless, he's gone in less than a year from biggest vote getter to 17%. That is half of the 34% of far-right coalition partner Matteo Salvini. And I don't know if we can call that up any further, that tweet. You see But you'll see there's all kinds of interesting memorabilia on that shelf. Number one party in Italy.
You're looking at the memorabilia, you mean like the Donald Trump Make America Great Again hat?
Make America
And just to the left of that, the little portrait of Vladimir Putin? Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, Salvini, he's a hell of a guy. Look, he's turned out to be a brilliant politician. I don't think people realize that when he was just head of the what used to be called the Northern League because it was a separatist organization. He turned it into a real national party. Some people say that's with the help of the mafia in the South, but I don't know about that. What I do know is that he's turned into a very, very capable politician who is really the strongest voice now, much stronger than Marine Le Pen here or anybody else that we could name in the far-right constellation, pushing this idea of populism, of far-right issues, especially anti-immigration issues, and finding a lot of resonance with the Italian people.
How much is he going to weigh on the proceedings that Johanna was mentioning earlier in Montas?
Well, you know, if I was looking at the tally yesterday, and in fact the Greens are just as big as his coalition, you know, they're going to be in third, fourth place. It's a bit of a disappointment. I think we haven't talked enough about the fact that people were expecting a real Eurosceptic wave, and there was no wave. You know, if you look at the results of Marine Le Pen in France, her party actually did less well than they did in 2014, even though in both years they came in first. Salvini is definitely in a different position because he is governing. He is in government in one of the most important countries, one of the founding countries of the European Union, and he's at the forefront of the migration, front line, as it may. And so it gives him a very big soapbox. But that bloc, if you want to talk about the Eurosceptics and the far right, is actually much less homogenous than people imagine. Orban, for example, is not leaving the EPP. He is staying in that family for the time being. So there won't be some grand coalition of these Eurosceptical currents in Europe right now.
All right, Matteo Salvini, who's traded barbs a lot with Emmanuel Macron over the past year, but happy to put aside differences when it comes to the engagement announcement between Italy's flagship industry brand with its French counterpart. Agnelli family heir John Elkann, all smiles after Fiat Chrysler announced it wanted to tie the knot with Renault. Both are 120-year-old companies struggling to remain relevant as the car industry segs to electric, autonomous vehicles, and ride-sharing. The biggest shareholder on this side of the Alps, well, that would be the French state, which currently owns 15% of Renault.
Aucune fermeture d'usine et la préservation.
No factories closing and the preservation of industrial jobs. That's the fundamental guarantee that I'm asking of Renault's CEO. The second guarantee, you've mentioned it, is that there is an alliance between Renault and Nissan that we want to reinforce.
Dans le cadre de l'alliance entre Renault et Nissan.
Antonio Rodriguez, no factories closing,
maybe
jobs preserved?
Maybe not, maybe not. The idea of this merger is a good idea. You will create a big car company here in Europe, a company which will face the challenge of the new situation for the cars today, the electric cars, for example. And that's very important. But I'm sure that Bruno Le Maire reminds what happened with other French groups. And, you know, in soccer, in football, we say that the Germans always win at the end. In the recent industry in France, the loser is always France. And it happened with Lafarge, a huge worldwide concrete producer who was bought, who had to do a merger a couple of years ago
with the Swiss
Holcim. And at the end of the day, this group is now Swiss, based in Switzerland, and with a board elected by the Swiss group. And with this Fiat and Chrysler and Renault deal, there is a very bad signal. The headquarters will be based in Amsterdam. And that's just for
tax reasons.
And that's not, maybe that's something that should be a concern for Bruno Le Maire.
It's also the week where we saw General Electric's Alstom announced more than 1,000 layoffs in the eastern city of Belfort.
Yes, and I don't believe that the government can do anything to avoid these layoffs. I'm convinced, and we talked about it in the first part of the emission of the program about Donald Trump policy, and we have General Electric closing the production here in Belfort in France and continuing in United States to produce the same products. And that's maybe the Buy American Act. That's maybe the American policy right now. They want not to produce in the United States and not offshore anymore.
This was the week, Montaz, where we celebrated the 50th anniversary of Airbus, which it really is seen like a marriage of equals. Antonio's not so sure the same will be true between Fiat Chrysler and Renault.
I mean, all of the concerns that Antonio has brought up are very legitimate, and I think a lot of the workers are going to be very concerned about that, because lately they've had the short end of the stick. On the more optimistic side, there is, if you listen to analysts of the automobile industry, they talk about the need for consolidation in order to be able to face the challenges that the auto industry is now facing, which means, bringing down CO2 emissions or autonomous driving. And you need to use economies of scale in order to achieve those. And it may also open, so this marriage may also open sort of an M&A bonanza. People are talking about Daimler and BMW cooperating more. I mean, it's not all negative if you look at it from a different perspective.
Well, we're talking about it as if it's going to happen, too. It's not. It's far from certain that it's going to happen. There was an interesting report in Les Echos, that one of the financial papers here, saying, when Fiat Chrysler made its offer, it was making its offer on the basis of about 50-some euros a share, which is down 20 euros a share since Carlos Ghosn, the old head of the alliance of Renault Chrysler, was thrown in jail by the Japanese. So all of a sudden, they're saying, well, wait a minute, if that's your valuation, that's way too low. We can't go with that. And other people are saying, well, the whole reason that Fiat Chrysler's made this move is because they think they're bottom feeding. They think they can get Renault.
Or you can look at it
cheap.
the other way, which is this is a way of Renault of sending its calling card to Nissan, saying, fine, you guys want to go after
there's
Carlos
that too.
Ghosn?
But all of that says to me, this is far from a done deal with Fiat Chrysler and Renault.
All right. The Agnellis, would they make the giving pledge launched by U.S. billionaires Warren Buffett and Bill Gates is the question. We're asking the question because Mackenzie Bezos did it this week. She's the former wife of Amazon chief executive Jeff Bezos. She's pledged to give away half her fortune to charity. Now, that still leaves plenty for the kids. And speaking of kids and inheritance, a word on the family feud that's captivated France. The son and daughter of late rocker Johnny Hallyday from previous marriages winning the battle to have the French Elvis's estate settled here in France. Johnny's last wife, Laetitia, insisted that should happen in California. Why does it matter? French law forbids parents from writing their children out of their will, Johanna Frendem, whereas in the U.S. you can do it. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's well. First of all, I think that this whole soap opera is becoming like more and more tragic. I mean, it's gotten to the point where you kind of forget that we're talking about actual human beings who are their whole lives are exposed, and it's a family tragedy more than anything. Apart from that, it's true. I think in most Western European countries anyway, it's you cannot disinherit your kids. It's interesting to see how they're like trying to make him all of a sudden more American, because wasn't this the great French national hero just a few years ago, and also when he passed away, of course.
And the court's saying he was a bit undone, or Laetitia was a bit undone by Instagram, because they went on Johnny Hallyday's Instagram account and counted the number of days where he was in the French overseas island of Saint-Martin.
That's how it's done these days. I mean, that's actually how lots of people who, operate when they when you're trying to find out or establish whether somebody spends more time as a resident in Europe or the States. So it's good to stay off Instagram if you plan on having a family feud afterwards. I think that's that's one of the lessons learned.
One of the many about Instagram.
Yeah, exactly.
Ramontaz, in this whole saga, people have really taken sides between the wife who cared for the aging rocker and the children. The daughter Laura Smet said, "I don't even have the rights to one of the songs he dedicated to me."
It's a super emotional issue in France. And I think this actually helps maybe the case of the eldest children, because if you go to the States and you say Johnny Hallyday, no one is going to know who you're talking about. And it's not going to bring about the emotional reaction it does. In France, every single person has an opinion and has chosen their camp. And I remember the day of his funeral, which was, by the way, almost a state funeral. It wasn't, but it had that level of public outpouring. Every single French person was either in front of their television or was lining the streets to say a final goodbye to him. He is part of what it is to be French, actually. He is part of French culture. And, on that...
Antonio would point out his tax domicile was in Belgium.
Right. And so that is very interesting. It ties into... Today, yes, you can, technically, on technical grounds, elect your tax residency. It doesn't change the essence of who you are. And that is what the eldest children are arguing. I think it's important to understand, as Johanna was saying, that obviously there are also younger children involved, and it has to do with their sort of financial well-being as they grow up, whereas the eldest children are well-established artists in their own right. So it's hard to take a side here.
You are kind of tempted to say, there's so much money left behind. How is this a problem? How could you not live off half of that? But I mean, I guess it becomes a prestigious sort of fight in the end. Or
Chris Verdicki, your thoughts on this legal difference between the United States and France?
Well, I think in this discussion, I think it's important people understand there are two legal differences. First of all, when it comes to tax domiciles, which we were just mentioning, the French don't pursue you around the world the way the American tax Internal Revenue Service does. If you're American, they're going to nail you wherever you go. If you're French and you move out of France or get domiciled someplace out of France, you don't have to pay French taxes. So that's what we're talking about there. In terms of inheritance, I always thought it was a nice thing that, in fact, if you can prove a DNA link to someone, you have a right to inherit from them. Of course, that here in France, but of course that could be scary for some people. But you can do. None of us, I suspect. But
it includes illegitimate heirs, is what you're talking about.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Thank you for that clarification, Rim. But in fact, that I think is an interesting and very different idea, because in France, in America, people are forever disinheriting other people. It's one of the ways they manipulate their families.
Mm. Well, we're going to have to leave it there on that somber note. Chris Verdicki, I want to thank you. I want to thank as well Johanna Frenden, Antonio Rodriguez, Ramontaz. Stay with us, though. Media Watch is next. And we say hello to Emma James.
Hi there. Yes, been taking a look at one of the big talking points online today, which is the fact that it's World No Tobacco Day.
Right.
We're getting all the usual kinds of...
I saw a few people, I'm not going to name names, I saw a few colleagues puffing earlier.
Well, yes, indeed. I'm not surprised. Lots of the usual kind of messages out there like this one. Tobacco is unique. It's the only product that kills half of its consumers. But what is interesting to note is that
Is that fact? Half?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, it comes from the World Health Organization, so I'd hope they've got it right. But what's interesting is that one of the biggest known firms, Philip Morris International, actually has this message: together we can unsmoke the world, which sounds a little bit counterintuitive given that they make cigarettes. They are tweeting about this all day today. Our unsmoke message is clear and simple. If you don't smoke, don't start. If you smoke, quit. If you don't quit, change. And that is where the key point lies, because what they're saying is quit smoking, but don't stop taking in your tobacco. And they actually want it to now be known as World No Smoking Day, not No Tobacco Day, because they say there are other ways you can ingest it. There's even a little whizzy video that they've produced, which basically talks about how much money they've sunk into research of alternatives. $6 billion they've spent. And they're encouraging people to believe in these alternatives, that they will be safe, that they will be healthy, and that if you can just quit smoking, this is the way to go. One thing that we should bear in mind, though, these kind of old adverts, Philip Morris saying that it is scientifically proven that they are far less irritating to the nose and throat, saying that it's much better for you than the other cigarettes out there. And they also finish this advert with the words, far finer flavour plus far more protection. Not quite sure what from, but obviously the tobacco industry has a lot to answer for when it comes to the messages it used to promote as opposed to what it wants to promote now.
I think they're still paying lawsuits over those.
Absolutely, I'm sure they will be. Interestingly, France is taking its battle against smoking a little bit further. After the 2012 ban on smoking in public places, we're now going to see a lot more of this. Parks where tobacco is banned. It's been trialled in Strasbourg. There's a complete ban in all green spaces there. They've been trying it out in Paris too, in a handful of parks. Now they're going to introduce it across 52 parks and gardens in the French capital. And they will start fining people. They said there'll be a few weeks for people to get used to the idea, then you'll get €38 fines if you contravene that ban. Some want it to go even further. This person saying, what about on the cafe terraces, saying that the non-smokers are obliged to be shut inside when it's summer because if you're outside, you're breathing in lots of smoke. Others think it's the nanny state, la reine des interdictions, the queen of bans or prohibitions, meaning Anne Hidalgo, of course, the Parisian mayor, has hit out again, says this one. And this person saying, well, what about all the cars in Paris? They're the real problem, so why not hit out at them instead of smokers? There's a lot of whataboutism when it comes to smoking. People are talking about, what about aircraft pollution? What about the dogs who pee in the park? What about the people who pee in the park? And the drunks and all these kind of other issues. Everyone's moaning about all sorts of things today. They are also banning smoking on certain beaches in Marseille too. And the figure in this article is that 500 million cigarette butts ended up in the sea from those beaches alone in Marseille.
Yeah, because I heard the fines are going to be stiffer for tossing cigarette butts than for actually smoking.
Yes, I believe it's about €100 more if you've actually thrown your cigarette butt away. So yes, a lot of people talking about smoking today.
All right, they're talking about smoking. And they have other gripes with the mayor of Paris?
Well, it's not her fault yet, but it is another Parisian gripe. Some people are trying to make it her fault. You may be aware that there's a real row about the trottinette or scooters that are littering the streets of Paris at the moment. You can rent them out and then people just dump them here, there and everywhere. Trottinette are trash, says this gentleman. There now could be something else to get in our way. Take a look at this video. This isn't a late April fool, I kid you not. Kangaroo is a Swedish startup firm. They are trialling at this summit in Malmo and Stockholm, and they say if it's successful, it's going to be rolled out in Paris in September. They say it's fun, healthy, and 100% emission-free, although I'm not sure that they're accounting for human sweat when it comes to that. Right. I did notice that it was a minute-long advert, and only 14 seconds actually involved pogoing. So quite how far anyone can get.
Why are pogo sticks a problem?
Well, again, it's something that you can rent out and then you can just dump on the pavement. And it's another thing that they worry is going to cause yet more littering in the French capital.
Johanna?
I think it's probably good for exercise. I don't know, but it's not really taking you places, is it? It's not a very good alternative to trottinettes.
We'll see if it takes off. Emma, James, many thanks. I want to thank our panel once again. Thank you for joining us here in The World This Week.